Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you and welcome to the fourth webinar in the Design and Communication series. Today, however, the focus will be primarily on communication, or as I like to call it, the art of communication. So I am Tiffany Richards, Senior Communication Officer attached to the cluster in Port of Spain. I have with me just for support today, she won't be speaking actually, Kathleen Sarker, who is the Senior Officer in Community Engagement and Accountability. So let's jump right in. Just to give you an idea of what we're going to talk about today, let me just start the slideshow. Right, we're going to talk today, we're going to define communication, then we're going to talk about some of the reasons we communicate. Next, we'll look at public relations as communication, and finally, we'll address some communication outputs, some practical communication outputs to help you get an idea of best practices and the way that you should be doing things. This definition of communication was given to me by one Professor Agri Brown, the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities at UW Mona, and I never forgot it, perhaps because it was the way that he broke it down, or maybe the examples that he used, but it really seemed to capture and explain, for me at least, this thing called communication. The reason that I put it here with the George Bernard Shaw quote, as well as the cartoon, is to help understand that sometimes we think that we have communicated, but in reality, we have not. So what is really important for me in this definition is the word meaning. Unless meaning has been achieved, then we can't say we have communicated, can we? If you look at the cartoon, I am very amused by it because on its surface, communication has taken place. There was an email sent asking for a file, there's a response sending the file, but what has been communicated, I'm sure, is definitely what was not intended to be communicated. So we are looking at communication as the interactive transference of meaning. And one of the more interesting things about Professor Brown and this definition is that he made the point that we can communicate with animals. Therefore, he didn't put human beings, he put intelligences, because he referred specifically to pets, like to dogs. So, and he thought that we could communicate with them. So this definition has always stayed with me, and I use it whenever I am trying to explain what communication is. So, why do we communicate? It's how we've been socialized. Unless you're Mowgli of the jungle, you've been socialized to communicate a certain way. Your first language is usually the way you were taught to communicate, and we use the words of that language, or whatever language you speak, to navigate the space in which we exist. It is how, through language, which, symbols, signs and symbols, how we attribute meaning to things. I don't know how many of you have experiences with babies, but babies communicate their needs quite adequately, even though they have no languages yet. And they and their parents, or they and their caregivers, are able to get to a point where they understand what the baby needs. So it's also to convey needs. We also communicate as a means of disseminating information. This webinar is a method of communication, and the purpose is to give you information about communication. I would say that this is very meta, but I'm not too sure about the definition of meta, but it sounds meta to me. National society communication. So we just spoke generally of the reasons why we communicate. But why should national societies communicate? I think that national society communication is not necessary. It's critical. It's absolutely critical. We are selling stories about how what we do helps people and in what way we help people. So the better we are at telling that story, I believe, the more people we can help. The background photo of this slide is actually a photo of the aftermath of Cyclone Idai in Mozambique. And unfortunately, what I saw last week was that this particular story is not gaining as much traction in mainstream media as it should, because the people of Mozambique need help. Right now, they are in the midst of a cholera outbreak because of what has happened with the cyclone. There's a lot of social media on it. I'm seeing all the usual suspects, all the humanitarian organizations, they are tweeting, they're posting on Instagram about it, but it's not necessarily on the mainstream media or on television. Although BBC did do something, it is not as widespread as perhaps it ought to be. And this is why national society communications, just an illustration, is important to get the story out there so that the people of Mozambique could get the help that they desperately need. What are the benefits of national society communication? I spoke of the why, but what are the results? An easy result based on the slide before and the situation with Mozambique is more aid, more donors, and therefore more donations. But what about transparency? We've seen in the American Red Cross how that particular national society has been hurt about the narrative about what took place in Haiti. That's a situation that you would want to avoid. So communicate so that your actions are transparent and no one can question them. It's also important to tout your success. I don't see why you shouldn't shout it from the mountaintops. This will give your organization credibility and hopefully encourage, again, more donations. But you also want to celebrate your achievements and show off your hard work. I mean, it is a lot of hard work, and I think the wins, big or small, should be celebrated. Communicating about what your national society does can also encourage people to volunteer or to become a member of the organization. So if they know, the more they know about it, perhaps the more they will be encouraged to be a part of it. And of course, finally, doing all of this, you're doing what hopefully it is you sign up to do, which is help people. So essentially, what you're doing by communicating is engaging in public relations. And I've put this definition here. This is also something that has stayed with me over the years because there are many different definitions of public relations. And as national societies, you depend on donors to funds, you depend on the public to volunteer. So it'd be prudent to have good relationships with all of your publics. However, contrary to popular belief, public relations is not spin, it's not propaganda, neither is it ad hoc, random, or reactive. In order for public relations or public relations efforts to be successful, the back-end work must be done, or else you're simply spewing a false narrative and both you and your organization, unfortunately, will lose credibility. So your communication should be deliberate, it should be planned, and it should be sustained over a period of time. But how do you have public relations or communication efforts that is deliberate, planned, and sustained over time? You have to develop a communication strategy, And this is a basic process of how you would do so. So, since public relations is proactive and deliberate, then these steps would be the first steps that you would take. I mean, of course, as you go along and you have more experience, you can flesh it out and you can do things differently, but these would be the basic steps. What is the point of your communication effort? What do you hope to gain out of it at the end of the day? Do you hope to raise awareness? Do you hope to educate persons? Is the goal to reduce risky behavior? And who is this communication targeted towards? Is it the youth, the elderly? Are you lobbying politicians? Do you hope to get corporate support? Who is your audience? And what exactly are you going to do? What will be your form of communication? Will you hold meetings, press conferences? Will you advertise? Would you go into the communities? Would you have skits or theatrical productions? And at the end of the day, you need to ask yourself, did you achieve what you set out to achieve? Those risky behaviors, were they changed? Or are people more aware now than they were before you started? And how do you know this? So, of course, you have to do some sort of evaluation and monitoring. So we talked a lot in the first two webinars about messaging, developing your key messages, and design within a particular context. So hopefully you're not designing in a vacuum, but hopefully your designs form part of a communication campaign. And a campaign, because information needs to be disseminated in different ways, and also it needs to be repeated over a period of time. And we'll go back to the words deliberate, planned, and sustained. So all of these things can form part of your campaign. It may be a combination, it may be some, or some may not be suitable at all. But if you're doing these, they should be part of a deliberate, planned effort. Monitoring, as I mentioned before, is essential so you can see what works and what doesn't, and you can switch your tactics, the one that is more effective. So just to talk practically a little bit here now, a media release, also known previously as a press release, and sometimes people still use them interchangeably, is a way to get information about your organization to the public. What you do is that the lead in your media release is the paragraph with the most important facts. So in designing your media release, it's almost, well, it is an inverted triangle. You put the most important information on the top and the least essential details at the bottom. So if a harried journalist is quickly scanning your media release, they can get the who, what, when, where, why, how, hopefully in the first paragraph, and if not, in the first two paragraphs. It's always good as well to include your boilerplate in the media release so the journalist doesn't have to go and search for that information, because a lot of times journalists are on a particular deadline, and the more that you help them is the greater the likelihood of your story being published or making the news. So if you have just the basic information about your organization in the bottom, I mean, that is not essential information in the sense that they can always get back to you about it and find out more. But if you have it there, it saves them time from getting back to you or having to look it up. Always, always, always include your contact information in case there is need for follow-up. So there's a number to call, an email, so that the journalist, if necessary, can get into contact with you. Feature articles. Feature articles are my favorite, well, one of my favorite communication outputs because they give you a little more room to be a little more creative. What they not, what feature articles are not, however, is a long media release. A media release is very specific and targeted towards news. A feature article, you can, as I said, be more creative and it's targeted towards a different audience. It must have a topic. You must determine what are you writing about. You must do your research beforehand. That will help bolster the story. It will be better if you interview persons so you can get quotes and anecdotes. Anecdotes help to carry the story along and add interest. And direct quotations makes the article more readable as it sounds more like a conversation. It will also be good to use descriptive language to help the reader see or know the place, the person, or the event better. With a little practice, feature articles can be something that you can really enjoy because you have a little more freedom in the information that you can put in them. Media interviews. A lot of the time, people are wary of media interviews. They're afraid of saying the wrong thing. They don't want to be the person who is the spokesperson. They get nervous in front of cameras. But the antidote to all of that is simply being prepared. Have the necessary information at your fingertips. Have your talking points. Have your key messages that you want to get across. And if you have that information, you can navigate and maneuver in any interview. I mentioned, I think it was in the first webinar, two attorneys in Trinidad who happen to be politicians who I think in observing them are always on message. They always, no matter what the journalist asks them, they are always able to go back and to reiterate the message that they're trying to get across, no matter the way in which the question is asked. Do a mock interview if necessary, well, if possible, and if possible, do it several times and record it so you can analyze it and analyze yourself and work on improving. If it's an interview that is broadcast on television, it is always good to see how you react in that situation because, you know, some of us, we have nervous tics. I've seen people rock and swing on swivel chairs, and all of those things can be very distracting. So if you practice and if you watch yourself practice, you can be aware of those things and make a greater effort to cut them out. Prepare your responses to questions that you think will come. And again, make sure to frame it around your key messages. This is something that may not be as difficult as you think because you can simply put yourself in the shoes of the audience. What do you think they would want to know? What do you think they would want to know about the project or whatever it is you're doing? Again, stay on message. Don't get drawn into extraneous discussions or conversations. Don't get carried away. Don't offer any information that has not been asked for. Answer the questions that are asked. And if this is possible as well, research your interviewers. Take the time to see how they conduct interviews so you will know if they're the type of person who will be very aggressive in trying to get the information that they want, or if they will hit you softball questions at first to warm you up, to get you comfortable, and then start hitting you with the tough questions. Yes, so know who you're going to be talking to. I once learned a valuable lesson about saying no comment from my PR lecturer at UE. There was an issue with, I believe it was tuition payments, and they were um, people were not able to do exams and that sort of thing. And so we decided, the PR class, that we were going to write a story about it, and therefore we attempted to interview her for the story. Now this was, um, I believe, after she had just spoken with the principal and the important decision makers at UE. And she had always made sure to tell us never say no comment. Um, but this is the first time we saw it put into practice. She left the building by a different exit so that we never saw her. At that point in time, she had just met with the principal and the decision maker, so she was not able to comment. But again, she was teaching us that you never say no comment. So what she did was she simply did not make it possible for us to ask her the question. And that was a very interesting lesson to learn and see it in practice. So that was a little bit about traditional media. Now we're going to go to new media or social media. While we still use traditional media today, social media has grown so much and it is the preferred source of information for some people. But before you simply post things on IG or you tweet whatever information, again, your social media marketing has to be part of your original campaign. I would hope that these things are not standalone because then their effectiveness would be reduced. And before you even decide to have a social media campaign, you need to develop several things. You need to develop a social media policy. What are the things you're going to discuss on social media? What are the things you will not discuss on social media? What is your persona on social media? Are you an authoritative organization? Are you formal? Are you informal? Are you very friendly? Again, this will all depend on your message, on your audience, on your purpose. If you notice and pay attention to some of these things, you would have noticed that fast food outlets, especially in the United States, they have a very, I would want to say, humorous social media, no, humorous brand voice. So Burger King will always be firing shots at McDonald's, and then KFC will jump in. It, for most people, they find it very amusing. I mean, there are the one and two who don't think that it's appropriate, but then again, it's a fast food outlet, so that is something, that particular voice could work for them. Be responsive. Social media is more interactive than traditional media, so take the time to interact with your audience. People will ask questions, if possible. See if you can answer them in real time, or if not in real time, as soon as is possible. Don't let too much time pass because, I mean, people are reaching out for a reason. They want information. And if they don't get the desired information in a decent enough time frame, it may impact your reputation and your credibility. Because, I mean, this platform uh, is specifically one where people can interact. And it's more two-way communication rather than, just putting an ad in a newspaper. So try and make the best of it. It's also a very visual platform. So take good quality photos, take good quality video. There are lots of editing software out there that you can use. So make sure to make it very visual and interesting and attractive. Nothing is ever really deleted on the internet. and there are social media sleuths who can go in and investigate and dig down to past output, and they can find a lot of things that maybe you've outgrown or you said but you deleted and they're screen captured. So remember and be very careful about what you're posting. So decide your social media policy and all of that beforehand. And keep in mind that there's a trend these days of cancel culture. So if a person or an organization had posted something on social media in the past that maybe now, in the light of all the learning that we're learning about different things, and those posts seem offensive, there's a call for people to cancel that person or cancel that organization. So if you're working or partnering with anyone, influencers, make sure and do your due diligence, because that is very important, so that you don't get, or you or your organization, you don't get canceled. Finally, we're going to talk a little bit about crisis management. Because as I just mentioned, the internet is forever and there's this thing about cancel culture. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with if you make a mistake or if your organization is caught up in some negative publicity? What is a crisis? A crisis can be anything from a legal dispute to an accident to integrity issues. It can also be a situation where, in the eyes of the public or the media, your organization did not react to those situations appropriately. And the first thing to do in a crisis is get on it quickly. If you let it spiral out of control, it will be very hard to rein it back in and control the narrative. So don't try to hide or ever lie. That will only make things worse. Get out in front of the story if possible. You want your version of the story being told. So how do you do that? How do you get your version of the story out there to combat whatever the other version is? Again, this is a process, and you can draft this process beforehand. So you can have like a communication tree. If something happens, who are the first persons that you contact? You need to get the decision makers involved. You, the director general, in other companies, the president, the attorney on staff, the senior officer in charge of the section or the department that made error. These are the persons that have the information, and these persons who decide what are the next steps to take. And the next steps come in the plan. What is your mistake? What is, when you are positioning this, however, keep in mind the repercussions that those mistakes or errors or incidents will have, whether they be legal or in terms of credibility issues. One person speaks so that you have a consistent message overall. So you don't have the CEO and the DG and the attorney and the senior officer speaking. One person by group is designated the spokesperson, and that person speaks. However, in the event of anything cropping up, there should be a backup spokesperson. If the initial spokesperson, you never know what may happen, falls ill, there's an accident, or can't make the engagement for whatever reason, have a backup spokesperson who can also adequately speak to the issue. Admit if the organization was in the wrong and say how the situation will be resolved. This has been a tenet of public relations over the years. You may have read or heard about various cases where companies admit that they've done something wrong, and I think it's in the honesty itself that people appreciate, but you also have to indicate what you're going to do to resolve the issue. So are there new safety procedures going to be put in place if it was a safety accident? The person with the integrity issues, are they going to be terminated, suspended? If it was something else that happened to a client, is restitution going to be made to that person? So not only do you have to admit that you were in the wrong, but you also have to indicate what are the measures that are going to be taken to resolve the situation. In any crisis, hard questions are going to be asked. So you should get prepared to answer them by practicing for them. It is better to over-prepare than to be surprised at the depth of the questioning by the media. You may also have noticed, if you look at interviews on television, when people are not prepared, they flounder, and that also hurts the reputation of the organization. If your spokesperson is floundering on national or international television, it damages the credibility of your organization. I should say further damages the credibility of your organization, since you are here trying to rectify an issue. So I know that might have been a lot, so I'll stop there for today. If anybody has any questions, if anybody needs any assistance with drafting press releases or ideas about future articles, you can let me know. I'm always available to provide support and help if necessary. So that's it. No questions? I'll give you time to think of some. Okay, well, if nobody has any questions, I mean, if you think of any later, you can always email me. I believe that we can conclude this webinar on the art of communication, and we are looking at the final 2 webinars coming up in this series. Thank you very much, everybody.